we go any further, it's useful to take a step back and have a think about stereotypes. I'm pretty sure you can all think of a stereotype. They're used all the time in all kinds of media. While they're not inherently evil, they have a significant impact on how we understand the world. We started this week with Ian considering some of the techniques that occur time and again in film. These techniques have long histories, and they shape what we see and know. Some of them both respond to and can be seen to draw on stereotypes. But also, in preparing these videos, we've categorised these techniques to make sense of the concepts and explain them to you. We categorise and group things like this all the time, whether or not we consciously know it. And so in talking about this, we're thinking about types. Types are important to being able to understand. We use them to decode what is happening around us. If we return to the idea of a fish, because we have categorised fish as being comprised of particular elements, when we see a different type of fish but with the same general parts, in our minds we identify the animal as a fish. Types or categories help us make meaning and understand the world. The problem is generally with how stereotypes do this. In particular, stereotypes essentialize. That is, they focus on a couple of elements and suggest that those are at the essence of something. And they naturalize those. That is, they suggest that they are fixed and natural and therefore that they can't be changed. So the dumb blonde stereotype assumes that all blonde people are unintelligent and or ditzy, and that this is by virtue of them being born with blonde hair. When you say it like that, it sounds really silly, but stereotypes have been used to justify horrendous things, from slavery to genocide to preventing people from having the right to vote. Stereotypes draw together widely recognised characteristics, reduce everything about the person to those traits, exaggerate and simplify. That is, Hall points out that stereotyping reduces, essentialises, naturalises and fixes difference. So to return to our discussion of binaries from last week, part of what is done here is dividing the world. It fixes boundaries and excludes everything which does not fit, and in particular they're used to dismiss reduced groups of people to produce a sense of order. Hall writes it facilitates the binding or bonding together of all of us who are normal into one imagined community, and it sends into symbolic exile all of them, the others, who are in some way different. It is noted that stereotyping occurs particularly because of inequalities in power and can also keep the power in place by discrediting and dismissing the people who are regarded as different. There are very significant issues with stereotypes of race and ethnicity, some relating to our discussion of binaries last week. Today, however, I want us to consider gender, selfies and stereotypes on Instagram. In their article, How Gender Stereotypical Are Selfies, Nicola Doring, Anne Reif and Sandra Poskell note the way that selfies perpetuate particular gender expression. They ask, do females display themselves in selfies more often in postures suggesting weakness, subordination and seduction, for example by lying down and or making a kissing pout, while males more often demonstrate their physical strength by standing solidly and showing off their muscles. In their article, the authors particularly note the work of Irving Goffman, who in 1979 noted trends in advertising, in particular that women were frequently represented in submissive postures, lying down, bending their knees, canting their heads, or smiling deferentially. Comparing images of men and women, it was noted that men are often associated with functional objects, while women caress them. Where men were represented with women, they were often shown to be taller or higher up, with women admiring them. So while we're not going to be determining this definitively today, and on Instagram there are all kinds of representations, some of which challenge gender stereotypes, it's useful to look at some images on some of the most highly followed Instagram accounts in 2020 to consider whether these ideas are perpetuated. So, for example, Cristiano Ronaldo, who has 204 million followers, doesn't have many selfies, but his sports photographs are combined with images of his family and shots showing off his muscles and strength. Ariana Grande is our second example here. She has 175 million followers, and her images fit quite closely with Goffman's notes about women's representation. In most of the pictures, her head is tilted to the side, she's touching her face, bending backward, while there's one photo in the most recent images where she looks right at the camera that is heavily filtered with a highly feminine appearance. It's unsurprising that The Rock is portrayed often in relation to his muscularity. What is possibly most interesting are the contrasts. When seated with men, he's of a similar height. In shots with Oprah and other women, he dominates the images. When he holds the tequila bottle, he does so in a way that seems assertive, in contrast to the more sexy image of Ariana. Finally, we can look at these images of Selena Gomez. In many, her head is canted. She's lying down or not looking at the camera. While there are exceptions such as this, she smiles widely. It's self-identified by Goffman as a feminine gesture. It seems these elements are still around 40 years later. Indeed, in the study I referred to earlier, they suggest that Instagram selfies reproduce traditional gender stereotypes and do so even to a larger extent than magazine adverts. What do you think? Do you notice these stereotypes around subordination popping up? If so, where? What do you think the implications of these might be?